special award of recognition to George Perez for artistic excellence and merit. George, let's come up.
For a while, John, Byrne, and I were trying to figure out which one he was talking about. Yeah, it's amazing how our careers are parallel to such a degree.
To my hero, who I've followed ever since then, Mr. John Byrne.
This is right now.
This is really embarrassing because I was told that my name was spelled wrong on the award and I should be ready for it, but it looks like it's spelled right here, and all the rude things I was planning to say have now evaporated. Oh, it's another award. Oh, all right. Well, my name's right on this one. You left the accent off George's, though, so.
Hey everybody, this is Petey from the Spinner Rack, and I've been listening to Rob Liefeld's Robservations, and it's interesting because there's always a lot of energy in his podcast. It's a podcast that you can listen to, Robservations. I've been listening to it, and he's somehow been able to keep his sort of fan idea of the creators, which ultimately, when you read these interviews, like, mine is all beat up of John Byrne's comics interview, or Focus on John Byrne, or the interview in Art of John Byrne, or the interview / description of Perez's career, or George Perez, Modern Masters, and then you have the Byrne interview and X-Men Companion, and then you have Focus on George Perez, and of course you get this nice picture of George from back in the day. Do I have any? I guess, yeah, there's some pictures of Byrne in one of these books, which I should just show, just to get past the picture of Byrne in X-Men Companion. Now, he did a video about one of the greatest rivalries in comic books, and there have been a few. And John Byrne has been one of the few that's had many rivalries with some of his friends in the comic industry. So the video that he did, Rob Liefeld did, was the rivalry between John Byrne and George Perez, and that they were the two top creators, and they were sort of swapping books and trying to top each other and stuff like that. Now, ultimately, there was definitely a rivalry between them, but they were both in the 1970s at the start of their career. I believe Perez got into Marvel a little before Byrne. I think Byrne came along a little later, and at some point, both guys were young, both guys were learning to draw, and both guys were taking like group books. So those are some of the similarities, but let's go even further back because their backgrounds are totally different. I believe Perez grew up in New York. John Byrne grew up in England and Canada. So that's a major difference. But at the same time, when they both decided they wanted to get into the comic industry, they both brought their samples to many comic creators, one namely being Neil Adams, and they were both crushed. They were both crushed. Do I have a Neil Adams book here? They were both crushed by the great Neil Adams. Neil Adams is a very tough critic, and he saw Perez's work, and he was talking about, since he wasn't using real backgrounds and real anatomy, he still would have to keep, if he was going to fake it, he had to keep it consistent. So he basically pointed out the flaws, and Perez went somewhere, and then by the next day, he got his energy back up, and he later became an assistant of Rick Buckler, which got him into comic books. Now, John Byrne, on the other hand, he got money up to go to New York, brought samples in, showed it to Marvel. They, just like Perez, most of the people said he wasn't good enough. And then he went to Neil Adams. Now, Neil Adams had a different critique for Byrne. And Neil Adams' critique for Byrne, I think he went over some things. The major line I think Byrne said was, "Hey, that's a good me, but what can you do?" And that was his thing. And of course, that's something, both of those critiques is something that's carried through their career, which would lead them different ways. Now, Byrne went to work at Charlton Comics, where he first had his brush with likenesses and licensed properties. And that would drive his career away from likenesses. Whereas Perez, on the other hand, he would take to likenesses and that sort of thing. So while we're here, we're just gonna show you a couple of the last sort of published work by of sort of new work, not reprints, by John Byrne here, which is Stowaway to the Stars, which is sort of a short story with illustrations, and it's possibly one of the best things Byrne's ever done, So this is here, it's a coloring book. There's also one in color, which I guess I could show you, which is that sort of thing. But then at the same time, luckily, the guys at Boom Studios, they took one of Perez's last work, comic books, Sirens, and they reprinted it into a large edition. Now, I think this is while Perez is going through some health issues, but the pencils are still strong. The inking is a little heavy, but if you see, and since it's three main characters, as Perez always liked to do, it still has a classic Perez storytelling. But if I would go also back to the pencils, and it would have been nice to see someone at this period while Perez going through something ink this. But Perez is still working. If he's still working and he wants to ink, let him ink. So these guys, and Perez, I think, is officially retired. He's done some covers, but he's not doing that much regular work. So there we go. We showed these guys who were titans from more the 80s, but in the 70s they made the name for themselves, and then in the 80s they became two top guys that would trade off the top positions, and up until even the 2000s, I think Perez got one of those top artist things for the Avengers. So, but I think one of the things Rob was pointing out that these guys were the top two talents, and they were trading off books. Now, Perez, when he got the Fantastic Four, he was sort of taking from his, he was assistant to Rick Buckler, as Rob said, but Rich Buckler was in a bind, and they had an annual that Perez was doing, and they said, "Hey, let's put this as a regular issue." And there was some flaws, so they sort of gave Johnny Storm a wacky outfit. There's still things that Roy Thomas was telling me he had to learn how the thing moved, something like that. And Perez was taking that stuff in and saying, "Oh, okay, I got to think about body language, this, that, and the other." And then, but Perez, he sort of had a jump as far as to be anointed as a creator, because on the Fantastic Four, Stan Lee was a regular reader of the book, and he saw Perez's FF, and he was just like, "Whoa, who's that? It's not John Buscema or John Romita. Who's this new guy?" And then he called in and he asked Perez to go to his office, and he's like, "I've had a new find," and he could see the energy in his work. So Perez got anointed by Stan. He got a raise, and then he went in, since he was fast and young, they started giving him, and at that point, comic creators would rather do artists would rather do single characters, and Perez immediately jumped to doing Inhumans. He was this after his initial work with, obviously, Man-Wolf. I think he might have done Deathlock, Sons of the Tigers, The White Tiger. He was doing the Fantastic Four, then he would get the Avengers and the Inhumans, and he was doing these 3 books a month at this point, just taking on everything. Now, on the other side, John Byrne, he got work at Charlton, as I said. he then got a call from, I think it was Chris Claremont, who was trying to get him, I think he was trying to get him work, and they said, hey, if you finish this Iron Fist, we'll give you the title. So he took that on, and then they gave him Marvel Team Up, and I think Jim Shooter was the one to say, hey, if you leave Charlton, we'll give you as much work as you can handle. He took on the Champions. He was another guy who wanted to do team books. So he was doing that. He did a little 3-issue fill-in of the Avengers. He was we had Champions, and then he was pining to try to get to the X-Men. And he was another one who was taking on 3. So that's where another similarity lies. But the difference is, from what Rob was saying, is that both of them were still the young guys in their career. So they were just giving these young, hungry artists these books. It wasn't like they were trading these 2 top talents, because they were, they were not. The X-Men was not the top book. The Avengers wasn't even the top book. The Fantastic Four was still possibly the top group book, and Spider-Man and the Hulk were the top Marvel books. So you had a period where the Avengers, which had some light from the, I guess it would be the Kree-Skull War, some of the stuff that John Buscema had done, but it hadn't overtaken the Fantastic Four yet. And possibly as far as the writers go, you have Roy Thomas, Steve Englehart, Jim Shooter, you would think that the Avengers had kind of been the top book, but it still was a Fantastic Four. So you had Rich Buckler, who was the guy on the Fantastic Four, and the top writers taking over that. So at this period, John Byrne gets the X-Men. So at that point, they're both doing like 3 books a month. So Byrne gets the Avengers, X-Men, and he starts doing the Fantastic Four. There's also another similarity, because Perez tried to work on redesigning the outfit, going back to the old outfits, which had the wider collars. And that you see that picture I just showed you, you could see that Perez was going for the wider collars as far as the Fantastic Four. And if we go to, there's a spotlight. Now Byrne had reversed it, but he had not only went for the wider collars, he gave it a little mock neck here. So he redesigned it a little, but you could see they're both trying to get back to what Kirby was doing, even though the colors are inverted on that. So you could see that similarities where they're both sort of jumping at the books. But as the X-Men is getting bigger for John Byrne, Perez goes through an artistic struggle. Like he has some pain, something causing him to not be able to draw, and then he kind of pulls away from Marvel Comics at this period. And that's where I think the difference lies. There isn't a direct, straight period where they're just going back and forth. There's a period where Perez tapers off in the 70s, and he's kind of struggling he's also struggling as an artist because he wants to get better. And he's like, hey, what does he do? He takes on Logan's Run, and he starts getting references, and he starts getting into what I said before when he's talking about faking it. He was like, now I'm going to really try to become like a better artist. So while he's trying to become a better artist, and he's trying to do likenesses and, real locations and really keeping stuff in perspective and something like that, he started to slow down as an artist. So hold on. So with that said, with Logan's Run and I think the Beatles Super Special, where you can see he's doing that, and you can see that's where they diverged, because Byrne after I think it's Rescue 911, he was kind of or Space 1999, he was really not into doing likenesses. So Perez is slowing down. He's moving more towards 1 book a month. And Byrne at this point, the X-Men is becoming not the dark, it wasn't in sales, but they was becoming a big book as far as the stuff him and Chris Claremont was doing. But at this period, in the 70s, we would backtrack and we look at stuff and we'd say, oh, the top inkers are Klaus Janson, Terry Austin, Joseph Rubinstein, and these guys. At that time, if you're a fan and you're a kid, you didn't really know the difference between finishers. Like I'd pick up a Ditko book, I would know a Ditko book. I'd pick up a Kirby book, and most of the time I wouldn't put down a book, whether it would be from, I would notice a subtle difference between some of the anchors, but it was still a FF book, a Chick Stone Kirby in comparison to a Joe Sinnott. Like there's a different style in it, but at the same time, it's just as a kid, you're just like, I just want it all. So there's no real telling that, okay, this is, I think later when you're looking at back issues, you decide, well, Terry was doing the best stuff, some of the best inking, and Klaus was doing some of the best inking. But at that time, as a kid, you're into the characters, you're into the art, because obviously I'm picking up Byrne and Ditko and John Buscema and these artists that I loved, and Kirby. But at the same time, I'm just like saying, I don't see much of a difference between the Avengers, the X-Men, the Fantastic Four. They're all books that have Byrne, and the same with Perez. I'm picking up there's subtle things as the inking, but at the same time, my mind is just like, I just need this stuff. So that his Perez's Avengers, his Fantastic Four, his his Inhumans, this sort of thing. So none of that really mattered. When the Avengers, when Klaus Janson is inking Perez and he's inking Byrne, it's just like, nope, just give me more. Just keep giving me more. So at this point, Byrne is keeping to his 3 books a month for a while, but I think he drops the Fantastic Four, and then he drops the Avengers, and then he picks up Captain America. So while he's doing X-Men, he's got Captain America. So he's doing 2 books a month and possibly some fill-ins. Now, Perez, on the other hand, he's trying to build back his career up. And he says that, George Perez says that in this book here, that his decision, we're going to use this as a schematic to show you what's going on here. He's in the late 70s or early 1980, he decides, you know what I have to do? I have to make a name for myself again. So he starts doing the FF again, but he doesn't stay on there that long. And he ultimately picks up the Avengers again after that. After Byrne stops, he picks that up again. And then Marv Wolfman and Lean Wen are saying, hey, we want you for the Titans. And Perez is not with the Titans, but he wants to get to the Justice League. So his idea, and this is not to compete with Byrne, that will come up later. So his idea is to do 2 books, the Avengers and the JLA at the same time. But there's a regular artist on there. So, excuse me. So he makes a deal. I'll do the first couple of Titans and help you design them, but I need to get the JLA, right? So they like, yeah. So they let Dick Dillon off of the JLA. Dick Dillon regretfully dies, so it's now Perez's book, right? So with that said, he's got the Avengers, he got this, and he's developing the Titans. So at this point in developing the Titans, he's like, I just started the book. I did do some things with it. Let me see if it gets off the ground. So let me let go of the Avengers. And he doesn't let go of the Avengers because he's like, all right, I'm going to compete on a different sandbox. He's like, I look at my workload. I got all these characters to do. So instead of doing that, he says, he writes Marvel and he apologizes that at this time his workload is this, and it's not because of anything negative. There's no beef between him and Shooter at this point now. He's just like, I got too much going on. So then he's doing the JLA, he's doing this book, but this book becomes much more interesting than the JLA to him because he co-created these characters or redesigned them. I think they were all sort of made up by Marv and Len Wen, but at the same time, he did the designs on this. And then, so then he just said, I'm doing this, and he do some special projects with that stuff. So at this point, he drops this book. Now, notably, this is the period, and same thing happens for Byrne. When he does this book here, right? When he leaves this book here, what's that guy? Don Heck picks up the JLA, and then the numbers shoot up. And DC notes that. It's like, wow, Perez, this popular artist, leaves this title and the numbers shoot up. It's one of the last times this happened, right? That a popular creator would sort of leave this title and the numbers would still go up. So that said, and this is where the similarities in their career also keep happening. Because if we go to, for lack of a better image of Byrne, at some point at the height of Byrne's popularity on the X-Men, he decides he wants to leave. So he leaves the X-Men. As Robservation says, Dave Cockrum takes the book back. And surprisingly, the numbers start to skyrocket. Like the book jumps up to be one of the top books while Dave Cockrum's on it. So what's happening? So at this point, the characters are still important. Even though these guys are fan favorites and they're going to the cons that people are loving them, the characters are still kind of big. So you see their similarities. So at that point, with Perez on the Titans, which was a book he was a fan of as a kid, John Byrne, of course, decides, there's only two members of the Fantastic Four here, that his book is going to be the Fantastic Four, right? We got Sue, we got the Thing, we got She-Hulk, who's a part of it. And this book takes off in numbers, and this becomes John Byrne's signature book. Whereas the Titans is George's book, and George and the Titans are similar to the X-Men, that sort of thing, so it's kind of carrying that kind of torch. So if you think about it like that, they're both on their top thing, their signature books for the 80s, unless you consider Superman or Wonder Woman. But for that early 80 period, Byrne is on the Fantastic Four, Perez is on the Titans. And at this point, Byrne is trying to better himself as an artist. He's trying to add different things. He's forced to ink because Terry Austin wasn't available to do the book. I think there was some sort of scheduling thing that led Terry to have more books to ink than necessary at one time. So he kind of bailed, and then next thing you know, and they made a deal where he'd do the covers and he did one backup story. So then Byrne took that on, learning to ink on the job, bettering his drapery, all the stuff he's trying to learn, trying to become better too. So both of them are hitting there where they got their success. And but Perez has rebuilt his name doing these other books. There's a little hoopla between I think it's the JLA Avengers that Perez was thinking about doing that kind of fell apart. And that's led to Perez not doing any books with Marvel after that, because he was doing a Marvel fanfare covers for Marvel. And then ultimately it was like, well, with this, me not being able to do this, I'm kind of bailing on doing anything Marvel. I'm going exclusive. Same as Byrne went exclusive, but it wasn't really any beef with that. So the similarities there. Now we can quickly, we've already set up and cleared up all of the past, that they're not really the top guys until the 80s, where they can pick and choose. They weren't really kicking people off titles, but they were the top guys. So from that point, I think there's another big similarity. I don't have anything Alpha Flight in front of me right now. So let's just quickly, can we find something Alpha Flight in here? We should be able to. We got Byrne. Yeah, here we go. So we got some Alpha Flight stuff here. Now, Byrne did a book, Alpha Flight, which was very popular during his Fantastic Four period. So since I said the Fantastic Four, do I have any little pictures of them? We got this picture, which is classic Fantastic Four picture. So with the Alpha Flight, there's a point where I think the comic stores were very critical of Byrne's stuff as his inking was drifting and going different ways. And there's an interesting thing that happens on the book. I remember when I was a comic fan, I'd go into the store, and then Byrne's second issue of Alpha Flight was a training issue. And they said, this guy in the store was like, a training issue? Like, that's what he's giving us? He's giving us a training issue, right? This is what Byrne is giving us, a training issue. And this is issue 2. It's like, this is like, he was really incensed. And I bought it and I was like, maybe a training issue is kind of, ordinary. Like, maybe that is ordinary. And I went back, and then soon after that, do I have this book here? This is a reprint of the New Teen Titans, the Baxter edition. This story opens up, which is one of the classic covers. At this point, Perez has upped his anatomy. He's very confident in his art. So he's doing very straight-on shots, so you can see that he understands his anatomy. And you have this part here. And I opened up this book, and the guy, this is flying off the shelves. And when I got in there, I was like, wait a second. It's a training issue. And I was like, there's no hoopla, no complaints. The only thing the person said was that, what did the guy talk about? He talked about later in the book, which was, this is a gorgeous book. This scene here, this is the scene that he only brought up, was them in bed. So with that said, this, and it's very similar to Alpha Flight number 2. They have a training exercise. We really get to meet these characters. There's a part where one of the teammates in Alpha Flight gets injured, and it's the same sort of dynamic in this book. After that, the similarities aren't the same, but you see these guys, the 2 top guys in the field, they started to have these parallel things that happen between the 2 of them. So as Byrne goes along and he's doing the FF and Alpha Flight and the Hulk, what's the name of them? I think Perez is just going, the success of the Titans, and you have, what's that thing? Crisis on Infinite Earths. His celebrity just building and building. Byrne, at the same time, people still being more critical, saying he should do this, shouldn't do that, this, that, and the other, Ink by Terry, all this other stuff. But at the same time, he moves over to Superman. When he does Superman, Perez had just stopped doing the Titans. He stopped doing, he finished Crisis. And he's like, I'm going to only do special projects. And then he sees Byrne and Miller do that. That's the only time where he said, well, I got to do something too. So that's when he picks up Wonder Woman and becomes, his own writer. And he also, that's the thing, that's the first point where he becomes writer-artist, like full-time writer on a book. So he's taken that next step that Miller, Walter Simonson, Byrne, all these guys had already done, Jim Starlin before him. So he had finally done it because he was always a plotter, same like Byrne, they're both co-plotters and whatnot. So he took on the writing, and so you get another similarity, and him doing a single character. And this is the Wonder Woman, him doing a single character. Do I have anything for his Wonder Woman? I should have something. If I go to this book, Storyteller, all these books you should just go out and buy. So here we got the Crisis stuff here. Oh, nice color. He did the Thunder Agents for a couple of issues, covers. But here's the money stuff, right? And this, I think, is an important part of his career, because even though there's a lot of characters here, him doing a solo character is some of his strongest work here, having him do a solo character. And I think it really brought out his work. And I don't think he should always do 3 main characters a page. Now, since both of them, after this big push in the mid 80s on Superman and Wonder Woman, post those books, they were kind of jumping around. You can see them jumping around trying to find the right title to go to. So you had Byrne on West Coast Avengers, Wolverine, She-Hulk, and also for whatever reasons, they didn't last that long. And then Namor for 25 issues, or no, longer than he wrote it longer. So maybe almost 30 issues. So that's a decent run on things. Whereas Perez, he went back to titles for 2 seconds. He had an unpublished graphic novel. that was, because he did maybe 10 issues, maybe more, maybe like 15 issues or 12, maybe a total of a year's worth of Titans, but he kind of passed that on. He did a couple issues of Superman, kind of passed that on. And it's kind of, you can see him kind of struggling to figure what the next project would be. He's finishing up Wonder Woman. It's an interesting interview, in comics interview, where he's talking about Byrne trying to do Captain Marvel, and him struggling with that. And he's trying to do War of the Gods. That didn't work out. And the next thing you know, he does Infinity Gauntlet, but he's not on there for that all that long. And then there's sort of a gray period in the 90s for Perez, where you have I think he did Silver Surfer. He wrote the Silver Surfer, which I'm a big fan of. Same with Byrne. You have Byrne doing Iron Man, all these other obscure things that weren't that big as far as comic readers go, but they were still to the top talents. So at this point, I think they also, since Byrne was doing more independent stuff, and he did Aliens, Earth Angel, which I'm a big fan of. Obviously, there's the X-Men that are right here. They're always going to be right here. But the X-Men, which they should have went with the painted cover of this, but I think there was a painted cover of it. I'm not sure. But Perez, at the same time, in the 90s, where is this? He did one of the things that people remember post that, which was Hulk, but also deadlines still kind of haunted him on this book, where he almost killed himself to finish that. And then he also did Sex and Violence, which is another creator-owned book. And then he went to Malibu to do stuff. And I think Ultraverse, that's one of my favorites of his period here. You know, it's only like 6 issues that he did, but he did iBots. There's a lot of weird sort of things. And then before that, there's a couple issues that are printed up Crimson Plague. Now, I'm a big fan of this book. It's only 2 issues that actually come out. This was actually the 2 models. I think everyone in this book is a model, but the 2 main characters are these models that I think either on the outskirts of the comic industry, but they were this. I think this character, this person I've seen at Comic Cons. I haven't seen Dina Simmons in Comic Cons yet, but this was a book that seemed like it was going to be big. But the creator-owned stuff had kind of died out, and it wasn't around the period where he had published it for Event Comics. It didn't, it was it didn't work out. Byrne, of course, I already pointed out the X-Men. He had a bunch of things. The X-Men probably the biggest thing that he did as far as creator-owned stuff. But, he had Danger Unlimited. He had Babe. And obviously, I point out some other stuff. So he had a lot of creator-owned stuff that didn't necessarily get him into back to where it was. So he went back to DC. He was doing Wonder Woman. He did the New Gods. So at the same time, the last big similarity would be that Perez, I guess it's in '97, post Heroes Reborn, went back to Marvel. And he went back to the thing that made him famous, which was the Avengers. Now, these Ultraverses, that's some of my favorites of the period, and his Silver Surfer, what he wrote. I really like that. But this is the big thing he did. He did the Avengers. I wish he kind of co-plotted more. He did more of the characterization of all these characters and having these 3 million characters all in character doing something different. Well, he's the only one that can do the Scarlet Witch Gypsy costume well. It's a costume. Snowy, no Snowy. And this is one of my favorites of his drawings in comparison. I'm working right here, Mama. I hear you. You little girl, you coming up? So, and at the same time, Byrne decided, you know what I'm going to do? No. Actually, Marvel contacted him, and he went back to Marvel. And he did titles that he hadn't done before. He did Spider-Man. He did one of my favorites, which I do have here. He did The Hidden Years. So he had these guys come back to Marvel in the Splash. You know, I think the Avengers sold more, but they both had a big splash back at Marvel. He went to do creator-owned stuff, and then they kind of trying to figure out their way. So there's not much similarities, but there's also the last bit, since I've gone on very long about this. Ultimately, there's a couple of times they weren't actually close friends, but they would sit at tables together and they would enjoy each other for the time that they were at the con. So I think at the first time they met, John Byrne said they did show tunes together. They talked about the show tunes they knew, and then I think Byrne knew something called The Conservative Man, and Perez turned to him and said, "Oh, I thought you might like that song." And then later on, there's one con where no, you can see them when they get this award where they're sitting together talking about the similarities in their career and the jokes and whatnot and that sort of things. I don't know who you were talking about, me or John, you know, since our careers are so similar. So I think I'll try to put a clip of that in there. Get out of here. Get out of here. Get. I'll try to put a clip of that up here so you guys can see that. And then I think what else? I think when John Byrne took on Wonder Woman, he said who would win in an arm wrestling contest? And Perez said probably Byrne. And then Byrne said something about, I guess, him not being athletic. He said, but since Perez made Paradise Island, took it from being palm trees to being very ornate and all this Greco-Roman architecture, he said, when I next see Perez, I'm going to punch him in the nose. So, but they also had another. There's a couple other things I guess I can point out. Byrne had said that Wonder Woman, like this sort of ornate stuff where it used to just be palm trees, and they said they were together when a fan came up and said, "Hey, Galactus meets Darkseid," and Galactus tries to eat Apocalypse, and he said Byrne and Perez looked at each other and said, "Why didn't we come up with that?" And Byrne, of course, did Darkseid versus Galactus. And I think what other stories did they have? I don't have a picture of Brother Blood, do I? I don't think I do. Let's see if I can find him in here. I guess I'm gonna have to put up the picture. Perez had designed Brother Blood, and I think Byrne was trying to draw the master for the Alpha Flight, and he was like, he keeps looking like Brother Blood. And then when he next saw George, he was like saying, I've been trying, when I did Master, I was trying to come up with the master, but he kept coming looking like Brother Blood. And then Perez said, oh, because he's a John Byrne character. I was trying to do a John Byrne character. And I think later, Mindy Mayer, who's in the Wonder Woman series, Perez decided he wanted to draw a Byrne woman right here. But I think Byrne was like, well, you looked at this Glenda from the Demon series that Byrne drew, so it was kind of using that character. That's not the standard Byrne girl, but you know, ultimately this is where their similarities sort of lie. And you can see in Byrne's what is it? You can see in Byrne's Angel versus Frankenstein, the inking, especially that cover, is almost similar to Perez's inking. So there's a lot of similarities between the two of them. And the rivalry, but I think more of the Byrne rivalry between Frank Miller. I think ultimately, if they were rivals, they just realized that their careers were just too similar. And they wound up doing this sort of the same things at different periods, and had sort of trying to do the same things. So with the FF trying to go back to the Kirby designs, like the old school Kirby design with the wider collars and whatnot. So there's a lot of similarities. And you see when Perez does the Avengers, you can see that sort of dynamic. So I guess you could say Perez is a little more dynamic because Perez is like Kirby mixed with Kurt Swan. If you can imagine the two of them, like the anatomy is trying to get to like Kurt Swan anatomy, but with the power of Kirby. And Byrne is more, well, Byrne has some Kirby, but he's got some Neil Adams. I think I used to have a better sense of, I always know that Byrne's inking is more like old school. If you look at Ditko's inking on FF13, that's kind of what Byrne, you can see Byrne going for in his earlier work. But outside of Neil Adams and Kirby and a bunch of artists, he's more of an amalgam of a lot of artists to get what the Byrne style is. So when you get to stuff like this, you see him ultimately try to shed all of it. Like he's shedding like everything that was of old. So that's it. You know, ultimately to say that these guys weren't the Titans in the 70s. They were, no pun intended, they were just the young guys trying to take as much work as possible and make a name for themselves, which they did. Spinner Rack out.